This is Leafs Morning Take with Nick Alberga and Jay Rosehill.
Now we've got a fight started here right off the bat with Rosehill.
30 minutes of live, nonstop Leafs talk starts now.
What's happening? Happy holidays, everyone. It's Monday, December 19th. Hello and welcome to another edition of Leafs Morning Take. Nick Alberga with you at the Golden Muzzy, where you can find me on Twitter and Instagram. And as you see, no Jay Rosehill today. He's working his fire job, but rest assured, he will be being on this show. He will be here in mere moments from now. Another installment of 3 Hits with Rosie, another award-winning production, by the way. I'm telling Rosie, he is getting better and better with these. Just wait for this symphony that he put together in about 5 minutes from now. Tough revenge night on Saturday for the Toronto Maple Leafs. Ilya Samsonov makes his return to DC, and the Capitals subsequently smother the Maple Leafs. No goal for Alex Ovechkin. Michael Bunting's 10-game point streak came to an end. And of course, Samsonov loses in his return, although he did exact a bit of revenge earlier on this season. 5-2, a full recap is coming your way. Remember to subscribe, tap that like button, leave us a review wherever you're checking us out. And don't forget to visit LeafsNation.com for the very latest on all things Toronto Maple Leafs. Thoughts, comments, concerns, or questions, drop us a line in the chat down below here on YouTube. We'll get to it later on in the show. And in about 10 minutes from now, Greg Linnelli, game day host on the Tampa Bay Lightning Radio Network, will drop by. Big game coming up tomorrow night at Scotiabank Arena. It's the Leafs and the Tampa Bay Lightning. And suddenly, Tampa's starting to surge a bit up the standings. They're 3 points back of the Maple Leafs with a couple games in hand. So we'll get to that big meeting coming up tomorrow night again with Greg Linnelli in about 10 minutes from now, the second of 3 between the Leafs and the Tampa Bay Lightning this season. A couple weeks back, if you do recall, Alex Killorn scored the OT winner, a 4-3 win for Tampa back at Amalie Arena. So that should be another good one. It seems like every time the Leafs and Lightning get together, it's a spirited affair, whether it be in 7 games in the Stanley Cup playoffs or in the regular season. I think they're 2 evenly matched teams, and we'll see what happens in the springtime as well. So Rosie's coming up, Greg Linnelli's coming up, but for now, we're going to get over the boards. So as referenced, a 5-2 win for the Washington Capitals on Saturday. The Ovechkin watch was on, and he didn't score. Quite frankly, I don't think he was a big-time factor. The Leafs in general did a good job with him, but they had no answer for the back end. You see the statistics right there. Trevor Van Riemsdyk scores. And how about Erik Gustafsson? This guy came into the game, hadn't scored in 32 straight games, and all of a sudden he explodes for a hat trick. Only against the Maple Leafs does that seem to happen. I just thought in general there was a lot of what we saw early on in the season, the turnovers, the muffins, if you will. Defensively speaking, the Leafs were a bit lackluster in the game. It's something we've seen at bits and points throughout this season. But as mentioned before, you're not going to have it every game. I thought the Leafs were okay in the first period. Thought they were excellent in the second period. In the third period, the backbreaker to me was the goal 10 seconds in and another giveaway. I believe it was by Michael Bunting. And from there, I thought the Capitals sailed. They played a pretty decent game against them. And Charlie Lindgren, you see there, makes 34 saves in that game. I thought he was really, really dialed in, specifically again in the second period where the Leafs had some really, really good opportunities. And you need your goaltending to step up sometimes. I think Ilya Samsonov in general had his struggles on Saturday, but how many times have I said that this season, right? He's been an impeccable story. So you got to give these guys the benefit of the doubt. Toronto just didn't have it. And when you lose back-to-back games in regulation for the first time and you're approaching Christmas, you're doing something right. So I'm not really taking much stock in what the Leafs have put together the last couple games. They really struggled again, certainly on Broadway, and the same type of conversation on Saturday against the Washington Capitals. Some bright spots, again, Michael Bunting, 10-game point streak ends. I thought he had a couple good looks in that game. They went to that 5-man power play unit too. I wasn't crazy about it. Of course, Bunting on it. They took Sandin off. I don't know. I just think it's a defensive liability, and I understand what they're trying to do. It's not like Toronto's power play has been great or anything as of late. So, you want to mix it up. And I've mentioned time and time again, now's the time where you reconfigure and change the look and investigate and trials and tribulations, what you can do with your lineup. But I wasn't crazy about it. And only time will tell. I know in the second period, they didn't come out with it. In the third, we saw it again. I think they're going to throw some different looks, and especially as they get healthier. When Morgan Riley comes back, I don't think it'll be a thing anymore. But I think if you're Sheldon Keefe, there's no harm in trying. It's especially with all the points that the Leafs have racked up the last little while. So nothing against that. Connor Timmins, the 3-game point streak, 5 apples in that time frame. I think certainly right now he's exceeded my expectations as to what I expected as him, as a member of the Toronto Maple Leafs. And I think the conversation has already started. Once this team gets healthy, does Connor Timmins factor back into that lineup, even with Morgan Rielly back? I don't think Jake Muzzin's clearly coming back at some point in time this season. So I think there will be a roster spot for Timmins. But at the very least, it opens up a new can of worms and a new conversation as to what they can do with their back end. And ideally, what this team should target, by the trade deadline, where the conversation a couple of weeks back was they need 1 defenseman, they need 2 defensemen. And now we're talking about Ryan O'Reilly. We're talking about a winger. We're talking about a center. And we're talking about perennial stud up front. So it's amazing how quickly the conversation and narrative has shifted from maybe even a couple weeks back. But certainly a lot of positivity in Leafs land, and it should feel that way too. Another big week coming up. They have Philadelphia on Thursday in the next gen game, 2 Eastern start time. So note the start time for that one. And of course, the Tampa Bay Lightning are coming up on Tuesday night, tomorrow night at Scotiabank Arena. Again, Greg Linnelli, game day host on the Tampa Bay Lightning Radio Network, will drop by in about 5-6 minutes from now. But for now, the feature presentation every time he's not here. I know you guys love this. Here's 3 Hits with Rosie.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to a very somber edition of 3 Hits with Rosie. Our beloved Toronto Maple Leafs have dropped 2 in a row, and now we will slide into an abyss of negativity, tearing this team down to its foundation as usual. Or we could rise, step outside, and realize the sun has risen, and nobody is dead. Relax, everyone. They dropped 2 frickin' games. Who cares? This big point streak that's been going on for weeks and weeks, it's over. Good. I'm tired of talking about it. Mitch Marner's little streaky poo is over. Good. He's tired of talking about it. Let's move on with that. It was a month and a half of incredible hockey. Beautiful. Guess what? No one plays that kind of shit forever. Not ever. Every team in the world, Stanley Cup winner, Dynasty, I don't care. They go through their little lulls. Let's not turn this Toronto Maple Leafs 2-game slide into a lull of negativity. We're too good for that. We've done too much to go to that place. Number 2, our attendees. Did Ilya Samsonov play very good on Saturday? No, he didn't. The first 2 were weak as shit. He'd be the guy to admit that first. Says, I didn't play good enough. I need to have those goals. I want them back. Hey, that's sports, baby. That happens all the time. He's 4th in goals against average in the entire league. He's 4th in save percentage in the entire league. Matt Murray's right there around the top 10 in all those statistics as well. Our goaltending duo is still phenomenal. Our goaltending duo is still deadly. And our goaltending duo is still going to get us very, very, very deep in this season. Don't forget that or lose sight of that due to the fact that they dropped 2 bloody games out of what? 15 that they were on an absolute tear for. Settle down, relax. Don't make the problem worse. Mountains out of molehills do nothing for this organization. That's proven. Number 3, what's the future hold? Tuesday, we're holding a game against the Tampa Bay Lightning. The Tampa Bay Lightning have been one of the few teams to beat us in the last few weeks. They beat us the last time we played us. They beat us out of the playoffs last year. They have been a little bit of a thorn in our sides in this division, and it is a perfect time for these Maple Leafs to take everything that they have garnered over the last little run that they have been on, setting point streaks, setting all kinds of things, having all the media and all the NHL talk about them. Great. I'm glad it's over. Let's start another something special here before this little Christmas go with the Tampa Bay Lightning beating them. How? Getting our big boys scoring the way they are, having our defense come together and playing a team defense first mentality that includes the forwards in our D zone and shutting down the opposition, and our tendies will get back to playing the way they have been. It's not a little slip up like we just had that's going to derail this thing. It's too good, it's too big, it's too strong. Everyone out there, relax. Don't do the typical Leafs Nation thing and start getting ahead of yourselves with the sky is falling mentality. This team is good. We're good. Everyone has a little blip on the radar. That's all it is. Tuesday is going to be a big showing. I can't wait. Back to you, Nick Alberga.
Again, I think I can confirm that he does not smoke a bowl before these things, but my fucking goodness, that is gold. Absolute gold there from Rosie. Just the dedication, the passion. I even sensed some Paul Bearer. If you're a wrestling fan out there, the Paul Bearer at the beginning was something special too with the whole hood situation there. But again, that's Jay Rosehill piping in after back-to-back regulation losses here for the Maple Leafs as they get set to host the Tampa Bay Lightning coming up on Tuesday night. Speaking of which, so happy to bring in my buddy, game day host in the Tampa Bay Lightning Radio Network. It's my guy, Greg Linnelli. G, what's going on, buddy?
What's up, my man? How are you?
I'm fantastic. First and foremost, did you peep the Lightning jersey behind Rosehill in that video?
Was that planned, do you think? Was that planned? I tell you what, that was the first time I've seen that feature, and a little scary, but it was pretty good.
It's so to start the conversation, Rosie's newly into media. I think he's hitting the ball out of the park. Obviously, when you work with a professional broadcaster like me, that certainly helps. But yeah, like he's got the personality, man. And you've worked with a lot of players in your day. Once you get that personality out of them, man, they're gold, aren't they?
They really are. We are, for the Lightning Radio Network, we're starting to use Braden Coburn a lot.
Yeah.
And just once they get excited and they feel comfortable in their surroundings, you want athletes to be up front and tell you the real stories. And he's doing that. So I can always appreciate when you get some honesty and some passion together. It's pretty sweet.
Yeah, it's a good thing. And certainly we're looking forward, Greg, to this matchup tomorrow night against Tampa Bay Lightning. What's been happening with the Bolts the last a little while? I know Vasilevsky's starting to find his game and they're feeling much better about life. And they got Cirelli back recently, that first game against the Leafs.
He's been dynamite. And the thing about Cirelli is now he is allowed the bottom six to be a lot more productive. It's not a coincidence they looked really good once he came back because he's fit in really well. What's interesting, though, is the dynamic here, Nick, is that there was a little bit of a debate when Cirelli would come back, who would be the second-line center, who would be in that top six. Nick Paul has just continued to elevate his play. He has stayed on that second line. Cirelli goes to the third. And all of a sudden now, that third and fourth line, they're a little bit better. So he's been fantastic. I think the goaltending actually, when they were struggling early on, allowed them to keep their head above water. And then you take a look at the standings right now, Nick, and you say, okay, well, look, the Lightning probably where they are to be expected after a little bit of a slow start. So Cirelli coming back has been fantastic. The goaltending's been really good. And I'll tell you who else has been solid. It's kind of solidified a little bit of that back end has been Ian Cole. Ian Cole, he's not Ryan McDonough, but Ian Cole has helped offset that loss to a degree. And then you've got guys like Zach Bogosian, who's filled in. Leafs fans know him pretty well. And Hayden Fleury's come in and has given them some solid minutes. So all of a sudden, the Lightning have found themselves with a lot of depth. And I'm not sure many people anticipated that when the season began.
I don't know. Like, are we surprised? At least I'm not here in Toronto. They just always seem to find these hidden gems. The opposite of that, of course, is Victor Hedman, who's been a stallion in this league for many years. I think he'd be the first to tell you he had a slow start, but what have you made of Hedman's game the last little while?
It's getting better, and I don't think it's a coincidence they're starting to pair him with Nick Perbix, a youngster who's come in and is just a defensive defenseman. I think, when you look at Hedman's career, Nick, he's had Stralman and Jan Rutta, basically as his defense pairing. Both those guys obviously aren't with the team here, and it took a little bit of, an adjustment to find who was going to play with him. Right now, it's Perbix. I think Hedman's starting to round into form, which is a good thing here in the last couple of weeks. So I think, yes, there's another level for him to get to, but I think the last week or so is a pretty good indication, I think, that he is approaching that right now.
Yeah, no, we expect that every year, especially after the year he just had 85 points. Hedman was everywhere, strong postseason. This guy's always just an absolute beast for this team. So I was just asking from a fantasy perspective because he was struggling point production wise. Sure. But again, this team is really, really finding its way. Another guy who's really stood out. I don't know what Julian Breezeball has on the other GMs in this league, but they always seem to find these guys. Brandon Hagel. Next thing you know, you're like, what? 26 points in 30 games, and he's got the attachment of Kucherov and point right now, right?
That's true. And so if you believe in confidence, and that's really a huge factor in an athlete performing, Hagel would be exhibit number one. He talked about this last year. He just never felt completely comfortable coming over in the trade. And it showed. Got a lot of chances scoring-wise, just couldn't finish. This year, put on that first line, and for whatever reason, it's clicked. Now, he's got elite speed, so that helps when you're playing with Kucherov and point. you really don't have to do much. Go in, do the dirty work. Those two guys, you put your stick down on the ice, Nick, you're probably going to get a point every game if you do things correctly. And I think that's what's starting to happen. We're seeing the finishing ability. And then playing with Kucherov in point, I think, has allowed him to pick up some points. And his confidence is at an all-time high right now with the Lightning. You think about Paul and Hagel and the combination right now offensively, it really has offset the loss of a guy like Andre Palat. And as we know, he was a fantastic player for the Lightning, not only last year, but during his career.
Do you have any insight on who this team could be looking at over the next couple months? Like, we often have this conversation around January and February when I guest on your show, but do you have any idea of what they could be looking at? Because we all know they're going to get that guy, and he's going to be Nick Paul. He's going to be Brandon Hagel, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think if Julian Breezewalk can make a move, if that's what you're asking, if he can make a move to better the team, I think it'll come at either position, meaning the back end or up front. I think, look, we saw that a little bit, the waiver claim of Rudy Balcers. Nobody's going to sit here and tell you Rudy Balcers is a top 6, but you know what? In addition to Cirelli coming back, when Balcers was claimed, that's when you saw the third and fourth line say, you know what, we better start kicking in gear because they're not pleased with our job. And Balcers has some NHL experience, and they like him a lot. So to answer your question, if there is a move to be made, it doesn't matter where it's going to come from, either on the back end or up front. I think Julian Breezewell would take a look at it.
What's the perception down south when it comes to the Maple Leafs? Of course, you saw them a couple weeks back. Alex Killorn scores the OT winner, but it was your prototypical Leafs and Lightning game. It always seems to be close, right?
I mean, I think everybody has the utmost respect for Toronto. I mean, I think everybody kind of gives a little jab at the Maple Leafs because they haven't won a cup in so long. But, I mean, that's not the fault of this current group. I mean, you could say the last couple of years maybe, but they're dynamic. And I think Austin Matthews is one of the top 5 players in the game today. We know about Marner and how well he's been playing, Nylander as well. I think the question you always have with the Leafs is what type of goaltending are you going to get? Is it good enough? Is it championship caliber? The only way they're going to answer that question is if they do it. But in terms of for talent, pound for pound, I mean, they're right up there with the elites in the NHL.
What's it been like for you? And I never asked you this question. What's it been like to cover Andrei Vasilevskiy? Like, I don't know where you situate this guy. To me, he's already knocking on the door, if not on my Mount Rushmores of goaltenders, period, in NHL history. Like, I think, you know how I feel about the guy. Like, what he's put together in the first, 10 years or whatever it's been of his career is like surreal to me.
Sure.
But what's it like to cover him on a daily basis?
You get spoiled a little bit when you're around greatness every year. You kind of take it for granted. I kind of had that experience a little bit growing up in Pittsburgh because you had so many, not only Hall of Famers, but legitimately top 5 players of all time. When you're talking about Mario Lemieux, Yager, and then you had Crosby and Malkin. I mean, these guys were fantastic. The Lightning have a few of those players. I agree. I mean, I think Vasilevskiy is the best goaltender we have seen since Dominik Hasek, if you want to just go in terms of ability. Obviously there's guys who have won a few more cups, but as far as I'm concerned, slam dunk Hall of Famer right now. And I think he continues to play at a pretty elite level. It's going to be scary to see what his numbers will be when it's all said and done. I think the one thing, Nick, he has learned over the last couple of years is kind of pace himself. Doesn't always have to feel like he's on the ice, when they're not playing the day of a game. So I think he's been able to understand how to be a professional even more so than previously. But I think he's the best goaltender we've seen for sure since Dominik Hasek.
Definitely. Like, I have to get into that conversation, certainly. And I think when you look at the Lightning crease in general, like, I think he just knows which games he's playing. And I know every coach does this, but I think if you look at the track record, I believe it's 3 on, then 1 off, and they keep going back. How much confidence do they have in Brian Elliott? Like, I think he's a sneaky backup goaltender.
Yeah.
I think it's quite clear, like, if Elliott plays, take the over, but he gives them good enough goaltending behind Andrei Vasilevskiy, right?
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, I think Elliott, and I throw Vassy in this as well, because I think their numbers probably aren't as good compared to how well they've played this year. I think their team's let them down a little bit defensively, and I think they would acknowledge that. I actually think Elliott could start for a handful of teams right now in the National Hockey League. I'm not going to sit here and tell you he'd be – I don't think he would be, a bona fide starter for a playoff team right off the bat. But, I mean, listen, Matt, you and I have this conversation about goaltending in today's NHL. I mean – after Vassy and a few other guys, you can question who your number 1 is. And like I said, handful of teams, 5 or 6. If you were to sit there and say Brian Elliott's going to give you 45 to 50 games, I think the state of NHL goaltending, some teams would probably take that. He's been good. I have no complaints about Brian Allett. He's doing exactly what you want as a backup.
It just feels like every player on that roster knows their role, and I think they're told their role if they're required. Nick Paul, Brandon Hagel, Perbix comes up this season seemingly out of nowhere, fits right back
Yeah.
into the lineup. Like it's pretty surreal to me. And again, it speaks to the coaching, and John Cooper and the staff there have done a tremendous job. I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you about Steven Stamkos, of course, us being in the Toronto area here. What
Yeah.
has he meant to that organization? And I always like to bring up the fact that, people like to throw in my face and covering the Leafs, like, when's Matthews going to win the big one? Marner, Tavares.
Sure.
Let's not forget, like, until he is around like 30, Steven Stamkos was noted as, a career loser. Like, he couldn't get the job done. And then the narrative has flipped tenfold, where it's like this guy could go down as one of the more winningest players of his generation, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think you could probably throw the whole Tampa Bay Lightning core group of players into that
Sure.
mold, because it wasn't just him. I mean, it was the Vassis, the Hedmans, the Kucherovs. I mean, you do a lot in the regular season. People want to see what you do in the postseason. I think when everybody talks about Steven Stamkos the last couple of years, Nick, it's certainly been just health and being able to train the way he has wanted to. And I don't want to simplify it too much, but look, the shot's still there. I think he's made himself a more complete player as he's gotten a little bit older. I think his line mates have something to do with that. He can win faceoffs. He goes into the corners. And when he's battling for pucks, he typically comes out with it. I think that's because he's been able to train a certain way, and physically he's feeling really well. Always has that big shot. I think he's the second best goaltender next to Alex Ovechkin of this generation. He's just a natural. We know that. But you're right. It's amazing what a Stanley Cup ring can do for your legacy. There was no doubt he was a Hall of Famer. But now I think when you win a couple and you have some of the moments he's had, then it's fun. You can start having debates of where you fit in with those Hall of Famers.
And don't forget, he's chasing a serious milestone right now. And what perfect
Yeah.
theater would that be to accomplish that in Toronto, right?
I think there's always going to be that interesting tidbit there with Toronto for sure. And I think he would probably love nothing more than to have it happen against the Leafs. Of course, we're talking about hitting that 500 goal plateau. So I think a lot more goals left in the tank for him. And listen, as long as you're on that power play with Nikita Kucherov, you're going to get some looks, because that guy's a magician. As I say, Nick, he can fall out of bed and earn 2 points. And I think Kucherov's one of those guys that just has a way of doing it, whether it's his shot or his passing. As long as those two guys are together on the power play, who knows what they can do.
It really is an embarrassment of riches, G. Like, even Braden Point, like, I think he's finally back. Is it fair to say that?
Yeah, he's flying. He's flying. And he's doing everything at high speed. Everybody wants to make comparisons, and that's fine. That's what we do in sports. But, Connor McDavid is the fastest player, not only maybe with the puck, but without the puck. Yeah, Braden Point's, he's right there with the puck. There aren't too many guys who can do what he can do at his speed, making the plays that he can make. And, the thing about him, it feels like his game's not flashy, but he puts up flashy numbers, which is, I always think, a sign of a really great player. So he's been fantastic. He's healthy. I think that's part of it too. A lot of these guys are banged up in the offseason, got healthy. Takes a little time to get going, but I think we're starting to see the Lightning really turn that corner and become, one of the elite teams still in the NHL.
Not to mention, like, all the games they played the last several years as well. So looking forward to that one tonight. Matchup 2 of 2 on this season so far for the Leafs and Lightning from Scotiabank Arena. Greg, really appreciate your time today, bud. We'll talk soon, okay?
All right, my man. Appreciate it. Thank you for having me.
Anytime. That is Greg Linnelli, game day host on the Tampa Bay Lightning radio network, and make sure to check that out. He does a phenomenal job. I've been on there quite a bit, and they do some fantastic broadcast work, out there in Tampa. So the Lightning in town coming up on Tuesday night. And again, as Greg mentioned, they're starting to feel pretty damn good about life. Anthony Cirelli back in the mix, returned, of course, against the Maple Leafs a couple weeks back. Kucherov's playing better. Stamkos is playing better. Braden Point's back. Nick Paul has been a great addition. Brandon Hagel, like, the list goes on and on when you handicap the Tampa Bay Lightning. And then, they have Mariano Rivera. His name is Andrei Vasilevsky, and also that Victor Hedman guy. Like, it really, really is an embarrassment of riches. And it's always a measuring stick game for the Leafs when they have the Tampa Bay Lightning in town or they're visiting the Lightning to see where they stack up against the league's elite. And Tampa is still, in my money, a very, very elite team who doesn't really worry that much, I think, in my opinion, around the regular season or about the regular season. They care more about the Stanley Cup playoffs. Meantime, the wrap-up is brought to you by our friends at PointsBet Canada. Okay, today's look is pretty simple. Alex Ovechkin, anytime goal around plus 100 is the value you're looking at right now. And the reason why I bring that up, well, Detroit is visiting the Washington Capitals. Ovechkin at 800, Gordie Howe at 801. I think the table is set for history. The Wings in town, Gordie Howe's former team, like everything is aligning for me for Alex Ovechkin to score that goal. I think you even look on top of that at the shot prop as well for OV 3.5, because I think he's going to be shooting. I think he comprehends, he understands the moment. I know there's a lot of media in town as well. So Alex Ovechkin, anytime goal. I think tonight is the night to rip that. The Capitals hosting the Detroit Red Wings. With that in mind, that's going to do it for today's edition of the show. Many thanks to Jay Rosehill for stopping by. He'll be back tomorrow to preview this one against the Leafs and the Lightning from Scotiabank Arena on Tuesday night. Many thanks to my buddy, my pal, Greg Linnelli, game day host in the Tampa Bay Lightning Radio Network, for dropping by, and make sure to check him out on social media. He is phenomenal, and they do fantastic work out there in Tampa. But looking forward to the Leafs and Lightning coming up on Tuesday night. So we'll talk on Tuesday. We'll tee you up for that one and get you set for the holiday season. Take care, everybody.